So good
Okay, you
evening,
can begin.
everyone. Okay. So good evening, everyone. Today, myself, Erica, along with Natanza, will be presenting on leadership, power, and influence. Here we have an outline of our presentation where we will be discussing transformational and charismatic leadership, power, influence, and leadership, sources of leader power in organizations, increasing power through political activity, tactics for assisting leader influence, and ethical considerations in using power and politics. So, first, we are going to touch on transformational and charismatic leadership. Transformational leadership can be defined as the ability to bring out significant change in both followers and an organization. Transformational leaders lead changes in an organization's vision, strategy, and culture, as well as promote innovation in products and technologies. They make people want to improve and embrace change. Transformational leadership is based on personal values, beliefs, and qualities of the leader rather than on an exchange process between leaders and followers. A true transformational leader can enter a struggling or stagnant organization, analyze the circumstances, and articulate improvements that are needed almost immediately. This type of leader is then able to guide the organization in defining or redefining its core values in a way that unites the group in a common effort. Bernard Bass, a man who added on to the transformational leadership concept, suggested that there were four primary elements to transformational leadership style known as the four I's, which include idolized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individual consideration, each of which is valuable to the style of transformational leadership. So here's an image indicating what each I may entail. So for intellectual stimulation, things like innovation, creativity, goals, and challenges will fall under that. For individualized consideration, this includes mentorship, empathy, purpose, strengths, and skills. For idealized influence, this is associated with role models, walking the walk, enthusiasm, and embodying value. And lastly, for inspirational motivation, we consider things like having a clear vision, optimism, inclusion, and productivity. Some examples of transformational leaders include persons like Nelson Mandela, who transformed an entire continent, Abraham Lincoln, who used his strengths for a big purpose, and Martin Luther King Jr., who focused on the greater good than his own comfort. Now I want to jump into transformational versus transactional leadership because you can't understand one without the other, right? So, transactional leadership is a transaction or exchange process between leaders and followers. A transactional leader recognizes the needs and desires of followers, then clarifies how those needs and desires will be satisfied in exchange for meeting objectives or performing certain duties. Thus, followers receive rewards for job performance, whereas leaders benefit from the completion of tasks. Transactional leaders focus on the present and excel at keeping the organization running smoothly and efficiently. The difference between transformational and transactional leadership in four significant areas are transformational leadership develops followers into leaders. Transformational leadership gathers people around a specific mission and vision and defines the boundaries within which followers can operate in relative freedom to accomplish organizational goals. Followers are given freedom to control their own behavior, Transformational leadership is arousing followers to encourage productive change. Then we have transformational leadership elevates the concerns of followers from lower level physical needs, such as for safety and security, to higher level physiological needs, such as for self esteem and self actualization. So, transformational leaders focus on individual needs for growth and development. Therefore, the leaders set examples and assign tasks not only to meet immediate needs, but also to elevate followers' needs and abilities to a higher level and link them to the organization's mission. The third one is transformational leadership inspires followers to go beyond their own self interest for the good of the group. Transformational leaders motivate people to do more than originally expected. Transformational leadership motivates people not just to follow the leader personally, but to believe in the need for change and be willing to make personal sacrifices for the greater purpose. And lastly, transformational leadership paints a vision of a desired future state and communicates it in a way that makes the pain of change worth the effort. The most significant role of the transformational leader may be to find a vision for the organization that is significantly better than the old one and to enlist others in sharing the dream. It is the vision that launches people into action and provides the basis for the other aspects of transformational leadership we have just discussed. Change can occur only when people have a sense of purpose as well as desirable picture of where the organization is going. Without vision, there can be no transformation. So in this image here, you can see on the transformational leadership, there is the four I's we discussed earlier. And under transactional leadership, there's contingent reward and management by exception to gain expected outcome. However, both of these leaderships leads to performance beyond expectations. Basically, in a nutshell, a transactional leader focuses more on the status quo, while transformational leaders drives positive change within an organization. Now we look at charismatic leadership. Charismatic leadership leaders have the ability to inspire and motivate people to do more than they would normally, despite obstacles and personal sacrifice. Many transformational leaders have charisma, a seemingly innate ability to inspire enthusiasm, interest, and affection from followers. However, charismatic leadership typically instills both awe and submission in followers. Charismatic leaders have an emotional impact on people because they appeal to both the heart and the mind. They may speak emotionally about putting themselves on the line for the sake of a mission, and they are perceived as people who persist in spite of great odds against them. Charismatic leaders often emerge in troubled times, whether in society or in organizations, because a strong, inspiring personality can help to reduce stress and anxiety amongst followers. Here's just an image differentiating charismatic leaders from non charismatic leaders. So, in terms of likableness, charismatic leaders have shared perspectives. For trustworthiness, they are more passionate. For relation to status quo, they create change. For future goals, vision is idolized. For articulation, the leadership is strong and inspirational. For competence, charismatic leaders use unconventional means to transcend the existing order. For behavior, they counter normative, and for influence, charismatic leaders, they transcend position. Basically, all these describe a charismatic leader, and a non charismatic leader will just be the total opposite of what I just mentioned. Now, to discuss the black hat of charisma. So, charisma can be considered a curse as well as a blessing. Charisma isn't always used to benefit the group, organization, or society. It can also be used for self serving purposes, which leads to deception, manipulation, and exploitation of others. Because the basis of charisma is emotional rather than logical and rational, it is risky and potentially dangerous. One explanation for the distinction between charisma that results in positive outcomes, and that which results in negative outcomes relates to the difference between personalized leaders and socialized leaders. Leaders who react to organizational problems in terms of their own needs rather than the needs of the whole often act in ways that can have disastrous consequences for others. Personal charismatic leaders are characterized as aggrandizing and exploitative, whereas socialized charismatic leaders are empowering and supportive. Studies have shown that personalized charismatic leaders can have a significant detrimental impact on long term organizational performance. Leaders who have been consistently successful in improving organizational performance show a pattern of socialized behavior. So here we have a short multiple choice quiz containing of 10 questions to determine if someone is or can be a charismatic leader. So that being said, does anyone want to participate by just choosing between A or B based on your preference for us to determine whether you are or are not charismatic? Anyone want to volunteer?
I'm willing.
Okay, so I'll read the questions and you just have to give me an answer, right?
Okay.
So I am most comfortable thinking in either A or B.
Hmm. A.
Okay, next one. I worry most about.
Hmm. Hmm. A.
I tend to focus on.
Hmm. B.
Okay, I prefer to.
Also B.
Okay, I tend to. I tend to ask.
A.
Okay, next one. I believe.
B.
I tend to persuade people by using.
B.
I prefer to.
B.
I would prefer to communicate via.
A.
I think this quiz is.
I'll say B.
Okay. So you didn't respond in this way for 7 or more questions, which means you have low charisma,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But that's not all bad. You can always have attributes to be a different type of leader.
Mhm.
So now we're moving into power, influence, and leadership. Power is the ability of one person or department in an organization to influence other people to bring about desired incomes. Influence, however, is the effect a person's action have on the attitudes, values, beliefs, or actions of others. Power is a capacity to cause a change in a person, whereas influence may be thought of as the degree of actual change. Which leads me into the types of leaders' power. So first we have legitimate power. This is authority granted from a formal position. For example, if someone is placed in a high position, such as a supervisor, most people under them, such as workers, are obligated to follow his or her commands. This source of power can be seen as legitimate, which is why people comply. Legitimate rights of formal leaders are accepted by followers. Then we have reward power, which is authority to bestow rewards on other people. For example, leaders may have access to formal rewards such as an increase in salary, promotions, etc. The followers depend on leaders for the financial and physical resources to perform their duties, and leaders can influence followers' behavior using rewards. Which leads me into the third power, which is coercive power, and this is the authority to punish or recommend punishment. For example, if a follower, such as a salesman, does not perform as expected, the leader, such as the supervisor, has the coercive power to punish the follower. Coercive power is a negative side of legitimate and reward power. Expert power is the authority resulting from a leader's special knowledge or skill. When a leader is an expert, followers go along with recommendations due to his or her knowledge. And referent power is authority based on personality characteristics that command followers' attention, respect, and admiration so that they want to emulate the leader. The leader's personal characteristics, rather than a formal title or position, is especially related to the area of charismatic leadership. Charismatic leadership is intensely based on the relationship between leader and follower and relies almost entirely on either referent or expert power. So legitimate reward and coercive power may all be considered types of position power that are defined largely by the organization's policies and procedures. Personal power can be used to describe expert and referent power because it is based on leaders' special knowledge or personal characteristics. So now we have the responses to power. First, we have compliance. This is following the directions of the person with power, regardless of how much agreement there is with that person's direction. When people successfully use position power, which, as we previously mentioned, is legitimate, reward, and cohesive, this response is compliance. We have resistance, the act of disobeying orders or deliberately avoiding carrying out instructions. People deliberately do not comply with instructions, resulting in limited power. And lastly, we have commitment, which is adopting the leader's viewpoint and enthusiastically carrying out instructions. When position power alone is stopped to rely on by leaders, they become more effective in leadership. The response to legitimate reward and cohesive power is compliance and resistance, whereas the response to expert and referent power is commitment. Now we'll discuss the role of dependency. One key aspect of power is dependency. The more people depend on someone, the greater that person's power. The nature of dependency relationships between leaders and followers in organizations fluctuates depending on economic circumstances. For instance, when jobs are plentiful, people feel less dependent on their supervisors and managers because they are more dependent on employees due to replacement being difficult. However, when jobs are hard to come by and unemployment is high, Organizational leaders have greater power over employees because most people are dependent on the organization for their livelihood. This type of dependency primarily affects a leader's position power, which is based on formal authority and the ability to bestow rewards and punishments. When supervisors are dependent on employees, leaders must gain and exercise personal power to a greater extent because people will often stay in a job where they admire and respect the leader, even if other opportunities are plentiful. When jobs are scarce, it is easier for leaders to get by relying on position power, but they won't get the full benefits of employees' enthusiasm and commitment. So for control over resources, dependency within organizations is related to a person's control over resources. People must perceive resources as important to create dependency. Scarcity is whether the resource is easy or difficult to obtain. A resource that is difficult or expensive to acquire is more valuable and creates more dependency than one that is widely available. Non-substitutability means that leaders or employees with control over resources with no viable substitute will have more power. These resources may include knowledge and expertise as well as access to people with high power. So in this image here, it shows that low dependency on a leader equals lower power. So for example, if resources are seen as unimportant, if it is widely available and has acceptable substitutes, then people are not dependent on the leader, therefore they have decreased power. Whereas high dependency on a leader equals higher power. So if the resources are important, scarce, and has no substitutes, people become dependent, therefore creating higher power to the leader. Now we'll discuss the sources of leader power in organizations. An understanding of dependency and control over resources provides the foundation for examining several sources of leader power in organizations. The five types of power discussed earlier are either formal positions or leaders' personal qualities. These sources provide a basis for much of a leader's influence. In organizations, however, additional sources of power and influence have been identified. The strategic contingencies theory identifies power sources not linked to the specific person or position, but to the role the leader plays in the overall functioning of the organization. Sources of power in this regard are interdepartmental dependency, control over information, centrality, and coping with uncertainty. So to just briefly discuss interdepartmental dependency, these are materials, resources, and information may flow between departments in one direction. In such cases, the department receiving resources will have less power than those in the department that provides them. Control over information, both access to information and control over how and to whom it is distributed, is an important source of power for leaders. Some people will almost have access to more information than others. To some extent, access to information is determined by a person's position in the organization. For organizational centrality, centrality reflects a leader's or a department's role in the primary activity of an organization. One measure of centrality is the extent to which the work of the leader departments affects the final output of the organization. Centrality is associated with more power because it reflects the contribution made to the organization. And lastly, coping with uncertainty. The environment can change swiftly and create uncertainty and complexity for leaders. In the face of uncertainty, little information is available to leaders on appropriate courses of action. Leaders in departments that cope well with this uncertainty will increase their power. So you could see the 4 points discussed just now combined together gives you increased power. And now I'll pass you on to my colleague who will continue this presentation.
Hi guys, so we're going to look at increasing power through political activity. So what does the term politics mean? Politics encompasses the processes, activities, and behaviors associated with governance, power, and decision-making within a society or organization. It involves the distribution and exercise of authority, as well as the negotiation of conflicting interests and values. Politics influences how resources are allocated, laws are made, and societal issues are addressed. It encompasses a wide range of activities, from campaigning and voting to policymaking and diplomacy. At its core, politics reflects the dynamics of human interaction and the pursuit of collective goals amidst diverse perspectives and competing interests. So how is power and political activity directly linked? An example of the direct link between power and political activity in society can be seen in the process of lobbying interest groups. Lobbying involves individuals or organizations attempting to influence governmental decisions by advocating for specific policies or legislations that align with their interests. For example, some big companies might spend a lot of money to persuade politicians to create laws that benefit them, like tax breaks or fewer regulations. This shows how this shows how people with money can influence others to make decisions make decisions that affect everyone. So for instance, powerful corporations make extensive lobbying efforts to shape regulations in their favor, aiming to influence lawmakers through financial contributions and access influential figures and other means. These activities demonstrate how those with economic power can leverage their resources to exert influence over political processes, potentially shaping policies to benefit their interests. Conversely, grassroots movements and advocacy groups may mobilize political activities to counterbalance such influence, illustrating the dynamic interplay between power and political engagement in society. Boosting one's influence through political engagement involves more than just excelling at tasks. It also requires garnering recognition and appreciation from others. This acknowledgement is crucial for individuals aiming to enhance their impact within an organization. In professional settings, being politically savvy means understanding the perspective of others and using that insight to gain support for one's goals. Effective leaders adeptly navigate organizational politics amidst resistance. They grasp at the viewpoints and the needs of various stakeholders, leveraging this understanding to their advantage. This skill isn't solely for top-level executives. It's a fundamental aspect of organizational dynamics that everyone participates in. It involves knowing how to achieve objectives when formal procedures or hierarchical authority isn't sufficient. Individuals can expand their influence by taking on more responsibilities, building relationships with influential peers, and managing their public perception. However, authenticity, insincerity can easily be detected and may undermine credibility. So now we move on to tactics for asserting leader influence. Now let's discuss how leaders harness their authority to drive decisions, steer change, and propel organizational goals forward. It's about leaders wielding their power to guide the actions of others, a skill that demands both finesse and readiness to take action. This influence often unfolds in personal interactions, where leaders form alliances, offer incentives, and inspire those around them. But it's not just about individual connections. Leadership influence extends to shaping the broader organizational landscape and even reaching outside the organization. Yet, it's crucial to recognize that not every attempt to exert power leads to genuine influence. Some actions may be met with resistance, especially if they're perceived as self-serving. That's why leaders must tailor their approach, considering the unique dynamics of individuals, groups, and situations. Furthermore, effective leaders understand the core principles that drive behavior change in others. In practice, leaders employ a variety of influence strategies, with those using a diverse toolkit often perceived as wielding greater power. While there are countless techniques for exerting influence, they typically align with fundamental categories of influence actions. A survey highlighted 7 key principles for asserting leadership influence, aligning the importance of personal power over mere positional authority or the use of rewards and punishments. So I'm going to use a mnemonic for the principles for asserting leader influence. So the mnemonic is rise lively, rise and act powerful and fearlessly. So first we're going to look at the word rise using rational persuasion. So using rational persuasion involves presenting facts, data, and logical reasoning to convince others of the validity of a proposed idea or request. This tactic relies on providing evidence-based arguments to demonstrate that a particular course of action is the most effective means of achieving a desired goal. Rational persuasion is versatile and can be employed when influencing superiors, subordinates, or peers due to people's trust in factual information and analysis. Effectiveness in rational persuasion is heightened when the leader possesses technical expertise related to the issue at hand, known as expert power. Additionally, the leader's credibility, known as reference power, plays a significant role, especially when certain aspects of the argument cannot be supported by concrete evidence. In such cases, belief in the leader's trustworthiness becomes crucial for accepting their argument. The next word we look at is lively. Make people like you. Building relationships is essential for leadership. It's widely acknowledged that people are more likely to say yes to someone they like. For instance, consider a scenario where a manager frequently takes the time to chat with employees during lunch breaks. This simple act of friendliness fosters a positive atmosphere and encourages open communication. Regardless of cultural differences, individuals respond positively to leaders who demonstrate genuine care, trustworthiness, and fairness. Moreover, leaders who uplift their team members' spirits by acknowledging their contributions and qualities tend to garner greater support and cooperation. Thus, leaders should recognize the significance of nurturing positive relationships and offering sincere praise in their leadership approach. The next word we look at is rise. Rely on the rule of reciprocity. Dependence on the principle of reciprocity is essential. Leaders acquire power by possessing something valuable to others. Transforming this power into influence involves sharing what they have, whether it's time, resources, services, or emotional support. Reciprocity is deeply ingrained in human behavior. People feel obligated to repay kindness or favors they receive. This unwritten rule ensures that leaders who assist others can anticipate reciprocal favors. Additionally, leaders can encourage cooperative behavior by modeling it themselves. Some scholars suggest that all influence tactics are fundamentally exchanges. For instance, rational persuasion is effective because it offers benefits to those who comply, while building likability succeeds because it fosters positive attention in return. In essence, reciprocity forms the foundation of effective leadership influence, fostering mutual communication and benefit. Other way we look at is and develop allies. Building alliances is crucial for leaders. Reciprocity where favors are exchanged is key in forming these networks of supporters who aid in achieving the leader's objectives. Leaders actively engage with followers and peers outside of formal settings to grasp their needs, share perspectives, and align on decisions. Research shows that adept network building positively impacts how followers perceive a leader's abilities and the actual performance of their team. Expanding one's network involves reaching out to new contacts and strategically placing individuals sympathetic to the leader's goals in key positions. However, if this networking is perceived as self-serving, it can lead to alienation among important stakeholders. The next word is act. Ask for what you want. To wield influence effectively, it is crucial to articulate your desires clearly and directly. Leaders must also express their goals and aspirations openly, as failing to do so often results in missed opportunities. Political efficacy hinges on leaders explicitly outlining their vision and objectives, enabling the organization to respond accordingly. Leaders demonstrate courage by assertively conveying their beliefs and persuading others to align with their ideas. An explicit proposal stands a better chance of acceptance, especially when alternatives are lacking or poorly defined. Successful political behavior demands assertiveness and a willingness to take risk in pursuit of desired outcomes. Powerful. Remember the principle of scarcity. Keep in mind the principle of scarcity. This principle suggests that people tend to desire things more when they are less available. When items are perceived as scarce, their desirability decreases. Retailers frequently utilize this principle by sending early notifications of sales to credit card holders, creating a sense of exclusivity. This principle by framing their requests or offers to emphasize unique benefits and exclusive information. For instance, selectively sharing information that support their proposal or ideas and highlighting that it's not widely available can capture the interest and garner support. As another example, consider the release of a limited edition product by companies like Nike or Apple. By creating a perception of scarcity, they generate heightened demand among consumers who want to own something unique and exclusive. This tactic leads to increased sales and brand loyalty. The last word is fearlessly. Extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. Extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. The final principle for asserting influence is the leader's legitimate authority in the organization. Legitimate authorities are in a position to be particularly influential. However, research has found that the key to successful use of formal authority is to be knowledgeable, credible, and trustworthy. Managers who become known for their expertise, who are honest, straightforward with others, and inspire trust can exert greater influence than those who are simply trying to issue orders. In addition, effective leaders keep the 6 previous influence principles in mind, realizing that influence depends primarily on personnel rather than power. By understanding the importance of rational persuasion, liking and friendship, reciprocity, networks of alliances, direct appeal, and scarcity, leaders can extend the power of their force and strengthen their influence over others. Ethical considerations in using power and politics. So leadership often involves persuading individuals to embrace actions that they may not initially favor, a sentiment echoed by former President Harry Truman. This underscores a critical reality. Leadership necessitates utilizing power and influence to achieve organizational objectives. Yet, this power can be vulnerable to exploitation. For instance, consider a scenario where an executive consistently undermines the efforts of a dedicated team member, ultimately leading to their professional setback while the executive advances. We distinguish between personalized and socialized leaders based on their approach to wielding power. Personalized leaders tend to prioritize self-interest and using power impulsively for personal gain rather than organizational benefit. Conversely, socialized leaders employ power to advance collective goals, prioritizing the well-being of individuals and the organization. Ethical considerations surrounding power dynamics are particularly significant in areas such as sexual harassment. When individuals are compelled to endure inappropriate behavior or advances in exchange for career advancement or job security, it constitutes a violation of ethical standards and an abuse of power. Consequently, organizations are increasingly implementing policies to address and prevent such misconduct. Navigating ethical dilemmas in organizational power dynamics requires careful consideration. Leaders should evaluate whether their actions align with organizational goals, respect the rights of all involved parties, and adhere to standards of fairness. Additionally, they must consider whether they would want others to emulate behavior in similar circumstances. In intricate landscape of organizational dynamics, ethical quandaries may arise that defy easy resolution. Nonetheless, leaders bear responsibility to wield power ethically, prioritizing the collective good over personal gain. By fostering constructive relationships and advancing organizational goals, leaders can uphold ethical standards and contribute to a positive organizational culture. So now we look at the guidelines for ethical actions. So here's an outline of the key criteria for assessing ethical conduct. The foremost consideration is whether an action prioritizes personal gain or if it aligns with the organization's objectives. Once this primary question is addressed, leaders can further evaluate the ethical nature of an action by considering factors such as its impact on the rights of individuals and groups, adherence to fairness standards, and whether they would endorse similar behavior from others. By honestly addressing these questions, leaders can use this as a framework to determine the ethicality of their intended actions. So this is just a picture to summarize the outline. Leaders will ask themselves these questions. Is the action consistent with the organization's goals rather than being purely motivated by self-interest? If yes, does the action respect the rights of individuals and groups affected by it? Does the action meet the standards of fairness and equity? Would you wish others to behave in the same way if the action affected you? If yes to all, then that would be the ethical choice. Okay, so in conclusion, according to Stanley, the Marvel legend, with great power comes great responsibility. Power and influence can be utilized for the greater good or bad, depending on how it is perceived by leaders and followers. There are different types of leadership styles, which withhold the individual type of power and responses to power. The role of dependency and control over resources can also create or diminish power based on how it is viewed. Politics in both society and organizations is a complex interplay of power dynamics, decision-making, and conflicting interests. Effective leadership requires not only task proficiency, but also recognition and support from others. It involves navigating organizational politics, building alliances, and managing perception authentically. Ethical considerations, especially concerning issues like sexual harassment, are crucial. Leaders must evaluate actions and organizational goals, respect for others' rights, and fairness standards to uphold ethical conduct and foster a positive organizational culture. And these are a list of our references. Thank you for listening to our presentation on leadership, power, and influence.